Hey, friends, welcome to this week's episode of Not Your Mama's Podcast. The title of this episode is Love After Trauma, Three Tales of Three Marriages. And I am so excited to have Judy Foreman on, a Boston Globe journalist and author. Welcome to the show, Judy. It's such an honor to have you on. But before we dive into the topic today, and if this is the first time the audience is hearing from you, can you give them a little bit about your background and how you got to where you are today?
Well, a little bit. Okay. Well, I grew up outside New York City a long time ago in a small town called Pelham. I went to Wellesley College, where I met my first husband at the first mixer of senior year. And so, junior year, freshman year. We were together the whole way. We went in the Peace Corps together. I had a baby in Brazil in the Peace Corps. Then we came back. We ended up getting divorced, but it was a very amicable divorce.
Mm-hmm.
I met my second husband, Tom, who's a laser physicist, at a cross-country ski weekend, which was great. We were together a long time, 22, 23 years. He eventually died about 16 or 17 years ago from prostate cancer. And then I was determined to marry again because I love being married. And I went on Match.com and a lot of other websites, and I met my current husband, Ken, who is a psychiatrist. Awesome. So the trauma that you're referring to was much earlier in my life, growing up with a very dysfunctional family, although superficially looked good, but underneath wasn't good at all. So that was the trauma, and there was a lot of healing that's taken place since then, which has allowed me to have basically three good marriages, especially the last two.
Yeah, it's always a work in progress, us moving forward through like our childhood traumas and things like that. So let's dive into that. So Love After Trauma, Three Tales of Three Marriages. Can you go into a little bit more into depth about this topic?
Well, I think one thing that I think is interesting, and it might be interesting for your listeners, I feel that each of the three men I married was appropriate emotionally for where I was in the ability to have intimacy. Emotional intimacy. I met my first husband, as I said, when we were basically both 18 and not emotionally mature at all. Even so, he was the right person for that time. He was cute, he was nice, he was not angry like my father, he was nice. And so that was great for what it was. We couldn't end up really growing together, but it was appropriate. And then as I didn't really do therapy while I was in that marriage, but after that marriage broke up, I did start psychotherapy, and I've done different kinds at different points in my life, and some have been more helpful than others, and I can talk about that if you want. But then I met Tom, my second husband, and he was pretty emotionally available, and that was probably all I could tolerate at that point, because my family was really messed up in terms of emotions. And then after doing a lot more therapy, I met my husband, who was a psychiatrist, and we have a very close emotional relationship. But I'm not sure I could have done that much closeness until I was ready. So it took decades, given where I started, to be able to do that. Does that make sense?
Totally makes sense. But I want to dive into, what did you do to help move forward in those traumas? What were some of the therapies that you felt were the most effective for you to overcome these battles that you had within?
Yeah, I just sort of did regular talking therapy for a while, which helped a little bit. I realized how scared I was of authority figures, because my father was very terrifying and sexually abusive. And then I did sort of a kind of cognitive behavior therapy, which was helpful, but didn't really delve into the important stuff. Then I did another kind of therapy, I may be mixing up the order, that did delve into more of the scary stuff. And I remember that therapist was very good. And I remember talking, we literally knelt on the floor together. She was holding my hand and we were talking to a pillow as if the pillow were my father. I was so petrified to say anything to this imaginary father because I grew up so terrified of my father.
Mhm.
That I literally thought I wouldn't survive feeling those feelings. I mean, it was that scary. So that's kind of where I started. And then the therapy that has been the most helpful for me, which I've been doing for a number of years now, is called internal family systems. I don't know if you've heard of it.
You know what?
It's
I have heard of it. I actually think I interviewed someone on this show that specializes in that.
I when I started that, I thought, boy, I have not been to therapy until now.
Mhm.
It was so it was has been and still is much more powerful and helpful than anything I had done prior to that. It's hard to explain without sounding completely stupid, but the basic idea is for you, for me, we have sort of a centered self. And then we have all these parts of ourselves too, like an anxious part or a sad part or an angry part or something. And they all are part of us. But when we're really feeling centered, like I'm feeling pretty centered now, I'm not blended, I'm not stuck in one of those parts, but I can easily get stuck in one of those. And then you sort of learn to get a little distance on that part and almost talk to it as if it were a little child.
Mhm.
Like, why are you so sad? Tell me about it. And you sort of establish a relationship with the different parts. I know it sounds crazy, but it really is extremely helpful, extremely helpful. And my husband and I have done it as couples therapy too, which is very helpful because um, if he gets really angry and it seems like out of proportion to anything that's reasonable,
Mhm.
um, we can both recognize, oh, that's just that angry part. That's not who you are. That's just the feeling of the moment, and it sort of detoxifies things in a way.
Yeah, that
It's
is a
not
good way to look
excuse
at it.
doesn't excuse it, but it sort of gives you a little more control over it.
Yeah. Going back to talking to, your younger self, talking to that emotion, why it came up, to work through it. Another thing that I do personally is, I have a picture of like, myself as a kid on the phone, and as
Yeah,
a background sometimes to like go back and remind that little girl, like, hey, we got this, we can do this. Like, there's nothing to be
right.
fearful of. And I remember my mom dumped all these like photos of me and just growing up as a kid. And I just started crying because it's like, where did that person go? Like we grow up and, we are different people in different phases of our life. And just like how you were mentioning, each husband that you had fit perfectly for what you needed, like in that moment,
Right.
and how you could actually love, to the extent that you could love during those phases of your life. And it's just amazing how when you look back like 20, 15 years, how many years, it's like, wow, like we've come so far, we've
Right.
accomplished so much. And like we need to give ourselves grace and acceptance that we've done so much and come so far, especially with you, like an accomplished journalist and author. Um, and like working through those things, feeling scared and vulnerable as a child, like your parents are supposed to make you feel safe, and I feel like that's some of the hardest things to overcome, like that
Yes.
childhood trauma is when you don't feel safe in your own home, you know,
Right. And
and
you don't even really know that you don't feel safe. It sort of takes getting away from it to think, oh
yeah,
wow, some people felt safe growing up. I didn't.
yeah.
It takes sort of an awakening to realize that lack that was there.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because what you grow up with seems normal. I mean, it's all you know as a kid.
Exactly. You're a sponge. You're like a blank slate. That's what
Yes.
they say. Things aren't taught, they're caught. We pick up on behaviors. But it's interesting, but we know inside and when we listen to ourselves, like something's just not right. Like this just doesn't seem right. Like why would life be this way? Even when
Right.
you have no idea, you can't like compartmentalize it or really understand because you only have so much knowledge of the world. The world's like, or like your life and knowledge is a pie and you only have like a sliver, tiny sliver of it when you're born, so, and you're always
Oh,
learning.
you have no words to explain it to yourself. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, you just don't, you can't get even the distance that words give you. You
Yeah.
know what I mean?
If for someone listening right now who's kind of gone through like that same type of childhood experience, what would you say to them if they're having, troubles moving forward so that they can learn to love in the way that they deserve to be loved and not how they think that they should be loved?
Well, I am a big fan of therapy
Yeah.
and also of groups. I mean, if the listener you're imagining grew up in an alcoholic family like I did, my father was an alcoholic. There's groups in every city
Mm-hmm.
for adult children of alcoholics.
Mm-hmm.
Same for people who are sexual abuse survivors. I mean, it's not that hard to Google around and find groups, and finding other people who have gone through what seem to be similar experiences is incredibly validating and reinforcing. I think that's really the key for me. Um, and that's pretty doable. I mean, regular therapy or IFS, internal family systems therapy, which I like the best, that gets expensive. I mean, it's worth every penny,
Mm-hmm.
but some people can't afford that, and but they're just as deserving of of therapy. And sometimes I think the groups like adult children of alcoholics can be very, very helpful. Maybe not as much as one-on-one therapy, which I still think is probably the best.
Judy, but I really appreciate you coming on, telling us your story. And I have 4 questions I ask all my guests, and I would love to know what your answers are. And my first
May
one,
I just mention, may I just mention my book in
of
case people,
course, yes, yes,
um,
please.
my book is called Let the More Loving One Be Me.
Okay.
I'll say it again. Let the more loving one be me. And it's a line from a poem. And it really does document how I've used therapy and my life as a journalist to really progress a lot from where I started. And you can get it on Amazon. Just look up my name, Judy Foreman. If you're looking up my name, don't forget it's Foreman, not without the E.
Yeah. I'll have
Don't
all
forget.
the links down below in the show notes so you can go
Oh,
down
great,
and
good.
click.
Thank you. Thank you.
Um, so my first question is who and what inspires you?
I want, don't laugh. I want to say Nancy Drew. You're probably too young to know Nancy Drew, but for my generation, the idea of a adventurous sort of detective person who was a girl, was
Hmm.
female, that was great. I'm being somewhat facetious because she's a fictional character, but for young girls growing up, seeing girls do cool things, that's huge.
I remember
That,
Nancy Drew. I watched
that's
that when I was little. And then they had like the movie that came out. It's like a long time ago. No, I loved Nancy Drew. That was a good one.
yeah, yeah, it really was.
And then my second question is, what is something you wished you knew when you were younger?
Oh, I wish there was something called therapy. I mean, that was so not in my worldview. I mean, I grew up and I would not have known who to talk to. Maybe a teacher, if there were a really nice teacher, and there probably were. But my father was quite abusive emotionally and sexually. And I didn't even know something was wrong, but if there had been a place in my school to, if there had been something in the ladies' room, the women's room locker saying, does your spouse or father or brother do such and such to you? Or are you scared of any men in your life?
Hmm.
Anything that would have given me a clue that, wow, maybe there's something going on here, that would have been incredibly helpful,
Yeah,
incredibly helpful.
that's a good, that's a good thing to put out there because people, like we were talking earlier, they don't know that they're in an abusive situation when they're younger.
That's
They
right.
don't know any different. And so I
That's
think
right. That's right.
it's good to like educate and, have people know like, hey, this isn't normal behavior at a young age so that they can,
Right.
start the healing process sooner because it's difficult, working through all those emotions.
Yeah, I think it's great that, a lot of the ladies' rooms have the signs, if anyone's do you feel safe at home?
Mhm,
If not, call this number. I mean, that's huge. That's wonderful.
mhm. And then my third question to you is, what's the essential part of your daily routine?
I would say exercise. As you know, I'm a science writer and I've written a bunch of books about science. My favorite one, which is from Oxford University Press, is called Exercise is Medicine. And it's not a how-to. It's not, do 10 sit-ups a day. It really explores the science of exercise and exactly why it's so good for your brain.
Mhm,
Obviously, we know it's good for us in general, but the book goes into specifics. I mean, it's exercise is especially good for mood and for thinking, for cognition. And it turns out there is a specific chemical that is made in the brain during exercise, only during exercise, that helps certain nerves grow. And those, the increase in those nerves does have a positive effect on mood and cognition. And, you sort of know that subjectively if you feel better after a run or something, but
mhm.
there's real biochemistry behind that. And that's huge. So I would put that out there.
Yeah, no, I agree. I am a firm believer in moving your body, exercising. I can totally tell the difference in my mood when I work out versus when I don't. Like,
Yep.
I'm like such a high vibed person when I work out. I feel like I have more patience, like I'm a more fun mom. But then sometimes when I don't work out, I'm like, just feel like I'm a little bit more crabby, a little more on edge. So
Yeah.
I definitely am a firm believer in that. And then my last question to you is, best advice you've ever received?
Feel the feelings. Don't run away from the feelings. I grew up essentially being punished for the feelings. So I ended up terrified that feelings were dangerous. And there was something wrong with me if I had feelings, especially sad feelings or angry feelings, but mainly sad feelings. My mother was phobic about that. But it turns out we all do have these feelings, and trying to resist them doesn't work.
Mm,
And you end up in feeling worse. I mean, it's taken me a lifetime to learn this, and I'm still working on it. But that would be my take home message.
yeah. Well, Judy, thank you so much for coming on this week's episode of Not Your Mama's podcast. It was such an honor to
Thank
have
you.
you on and share your story. All of
Thank
her
you.
links are down below in the show notes. Don't be shy. Go say hi, and I will see you guys all in the next one. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.